The United States is deploying reinforcements to the Middle East as more and more horrific information emerges about the suppression of the Iranian uprising. In this video, we want to talk about it. What happened in Iran? How does the government plan to deal with the uprising and process it? And above all, should we expect a military strike from Trump? All of that, here in this video.
Wow, save more at Holy using my code.
There's a report in the Sunday Times stating that 16,500 people have been killed and 330,000 injured. The number of injured people in particular seems extremely high, but it's important to understand that injury can theoretically mean anything, including irritation from tear gas, but especially also injuries caused by other means, pellets from shotguns, and these have apparently been used on a large scale and, of course, have a certain spread. That means someone who got hit in the arm by such a pellet is not in life-threatening danger, but technically, they have undoubtedly been injured. According to the report, most of the injuries and deaths happened in just 2 days, during the bloodiest suppression of unrest in the history of the Iranian regime. Most of the victims were under 30 years old. The figures, compiled by staff at 8 major eye clinics and 16 emergency rooms across the country, show that at least 16,500 to 18,000 people were killed, and 300,000 to 360,000 victims were injured. Among them were children and pregnant women. Among the women, at least 700 to 1,000 people have lost an eye. One eye clinic in Tehran alone, the Noor Clinic, has documented 7,000 eye injuries. There are so many gunshot wounds to the eye that we don't know who to treat first, said an ophthalmologist. Another person, who managed to leave Iran quickly last week, said, "My brother works at the Noor Clinic." He said that in just one night and in Tehran alone, there were more than 800 cases of eye removals due to shotgun blasts to the eyes. My brother also said that the numbers are based on his conversations with other doctors in hospitals in other cities, are extremely high, and that possibly more than 8,000 people across the country have been blinded by shotgun blasts. A protester who fled Iran yesterday told the Sunday Times that the injured who had been shot in the eyes and had their eyes removed were immediately taken away from the operating rooms by security forces. According to reports, Basij militias dragged bodies from the streets and took them to other cities for burial so that no records would exist. Or do they demand large sums like the one the couple paid for the release of their dead daughter's body? This is mentioned in the article by the Sunday Times. A person who managed to leave the country said they have set up checkpoints everywhere. They search everyone's phones, look through their photo galleries, and inspect people's bodies. If they find pellets on someone, they assume that person participated in the protests and arrest them immediately. A nurse in Isfahan told me that every 2 hours, 50 to 100 bodies were brought out, and that was just in a single hospital. According to reports, when the couple tried to retrieve the body, someone had pellets, and they were arrested. Family circle. I'm very worried about my family. A picture has also surfaced showing a scan of a woman who has 47 pellets in her face. We can see that they are spread all over her face. That means she took a shotgun blast to the face. The government has clearly used birdshot in certain exceptional cases. It's not immediately fatal, but of course it penetrates soft tissue and can destroy the eyes. At the same time, government media also report countless arrests, which are being reported from various cities. And the head of the Supreme Court says there should be convictions as quickly as possible, and that no mercy should be expected. Meanwhile, in Iran, a semblance of normality is slowly returning. There is still a massive presence of regime forces in the cities. The schools are reopening. Iran claims to have arrested Mossad agents, but internet issues persist. The government announced internet restrictions will stay in place until the 40th day after these incidents and will not be fully restored. There's a special reason why it's 40 days. Because in Shia Islam, there is an initial mourning period of 40 days. In Iran, at the end of this period, so at the end of these 40 days, there are always incidents. Protests arose, even during the empire under the Shah. And that's what I've mentioned in previous videos, which I'll link for you here, that the shooting of demonstrators then led to further demonstrations, which kept getting bigger. And here, the regime obviously wants to make sure, through internet restrictions, that on the 40th day, things don't flare up again to any significant extent. There are now reports that there will be a step-by-step reactivation, starting with short message service functions, then domestic internet, and messaging apps that are also domestic. The government will maintain full control, and only then will international access return, though this comes with economic costs. NetBlocks believes that about 1.5 million United States dollars in damage is caused per hour, as long as Iran is disconnected from the internet. And a non-governmental organization from the United States that deals with the topic of digital freedom, the internet, etc., writes, "The plan in Iran is to only allow people on a whitelist back onto the international internet." At this point, however, I cannot confirm that from my side. Whether today's sponsor is on a whitelist in Iran, I can't really say, but it is certified on the Cologne list, since the product is allowed for high-performance athletes. And as I said, that and more in the commercial. With the new year, I've set new goals for myself. This year, I want to drastically increase my productivity without working even more at the same time. To do that, I need to integrate reliable routines, like focused work and regular exercise, into my daily schedule. Another one of those for me has been AG1 for a long time. I drink AG1 every morning. 1 scoop, shake it briefly in water, and it's done. Not as a miracle cure, but as a consistent start to the day without any extra effort. AG1 contains over 70 high-quality ingredients: vitamins, minerals, plant compounds, bacterial cultures, and fiber. I can't say for sure what works the same for everyone, but I have the impression that this routine helps me stick with it, especially when everyday life gets busy again. I haven't gotten significantly sick since I started taking AG1, which might be a coincidence, but it's still noticeable to me. AG1 has invested in research for over 15 years and tests its products in clinical studies. For example, it showed that certain AG1 nutrients are quickly bioavailable and can significantly increase good gut bacteria on average. Every batch is independently tested and certified. Currently, there is an exclusive limited offer: a 900 ml stainless steel thermos bottle and 5 travel packs for free, with no minimum subscription period and a 30-day money-back guarantee. So you can try AG1 without any risk, because you're not taking any chances. You can find all the information at Drinkage 1. Military and History with Torsten Heinrich. Heavy security has temporarily quelled the revolution, but the regime can't keep troops deployed forever. That simply isn't possible due to fatigue. And of course, financial reasons. The current curfew also can't be maintained permanently. It's simply poison for economic activity in Iran. In addition, it shows that the regime still feels threatened. The continuation of these measures shows this, and the ongoing internet restrictions also indicate it. The protest started with merchants in Tehran because of the currency collapse. Currently, there are no economic measures in sight to address the problem. Ali Khamenei says the revolution was carried out by terrorists, and these were funded and trained by the United States and Israel. In addition, there were naive teenagers involved. That means, according to the official statements from the government, there is no indication that they want to take any action to prevent a recurrence or to ease the situation. However, this article appeared in a diaspora media outlet, written by a former representative of the Islamic Republic. He practically acted as a leaker there and provided the information. And according to that, Khamenei would support the head of the National Security Council, Ali Larijani, in a reform plan. They modeled the suppression of the revolutionaries after the massacre at Tiananmen Square in Beijing in 1989, where 3,000 to 10,000 people were killed by the Chinese government. The massacre still serves as a means of intimidation in China today. Using this intimidation as a basis, Larijani then plans a reform. He is planning economic and cultural reforms, as happened under Deng Xiaoping in China, in order to save the regime in the long term. I have previously discussed here that the regime will be forced to implement reforms if it wants to save itself. or else it will have to resort to further brutal violence because the core problem remains. And the very fact that people are calling for the Shah shows that it won't just take a few minor economic concessions to calm things down, but rather there must be fundamental reforms. According to the article, the key condition is no attack from Israel or the United States of America. That means it's a way to communicate to the United States and Israeli governments. We will carry out reforms, but only if you let us. Otherwise, things will continue as they are. It's also interesting that the reformer who is supposed to carry this out is the head of the National Security Council, who was responsible for the crackdown. That's remarkable. On the other hand, we can also say that his reforms could be seen as somewhat legitimate within the regime itself, because he is the hardliner who is possibly responsible for 16,000 deaths, but at the same time, because of that, he is able to carry out the reforms. However, we have to say at this point that the United States attack is still on the radar. That's what the Israeli media are saying here. We have Ynet here, an Israeli outlet, where the translation isn't working quite right at the moment, but we've got it now. It's still on the radar. Currently, 2 French A330 multi-role tanker transport have flown to Jordan. It's unclear why. These are transport and refueling aircraft. However, there is currently no evidence that they have brought French fighter jets to the Middle East, or that the French would even participate in a military strike. We do know, however, that an official statement says an F-15E squadron has relocated to Jordan. These are Strike Eagles, which are well suited for ground attacks. Very powerful fighter jets with a long range, so they could be helpful in this situation. Open source intelligence reports that some transport aircraft are now on site after traveling there. At least 2 of them were intended to support the F-15S overall. There is simply no sign of a massive American deployment at the moment. Up to 13 tankers in Jordan and Qatar don't change that either. That seems to be a bit more than before. But we are not seeing a massive deployment of forces like we saw before Operation Midnight Hammer, for example. I made a video about this on the channel and said, I think, 6 days before, that the Americans would definitely attack. I'll link it for you here as well. I can't see any sign of that kind at the moment. Carrier Strike Group 3, led by the United States ship Abraham Lincoln, will probably arrive around the 24th. It will be in the Arabian Sea, east of Oman, and close enough to carry out airstrikes on Iran. That means before the 24th Tsano. Nothing is likely to happen before January 24th, but of course, attacks could occur earlier. The Americans still likely have over 100 fighter jets and possibly more stationed in the Middle East. They can launch cruise missiles from the aircraft carrier's escort ships in advance. They have 3 ships with cruise missiles on site, plus probably at least 1 submarine. They could launch something from bombers. But for now, we don't see significant movement. Recently, a report stated that 2 American aircraft carriers left port. One from Norfolk on the east coast and one from San Diego on the west coast. However, it would have been a very clear sign if the aircraft carrier leaving from Norfolk in the east was already on its way to the Mediterranean. But that's not the case. The United States ship George H.W. Bush is 100 miles off the east coast of the United States and is obviously just conducting training exercises there. As it stands, only 1 aircraft carrier will be present by week's end. What about Israel? Here too. The main question is what Israel will do. The Times of Israel wrote an article about this, concluding that the costs for Israel are high and its ability to help the Iranian people is limited. Danny Kurtinovich, a researcher at the Institute for National Security Studies in Israel, and a former head of the Iran Research Department at Israeli Military Intelligence, says in the Times of Israel, from an operational perspective, there is no American military strike that would bring about regime change in Iran. A regime change would require lengthy, extensive, and sustained military strikes over a longer period of time, explained Kurtinovich. Washington's theoretical offensive scope will directly affect Israel's involvement. The more limited the attack, the less likely it is that Israel will be drawn in. However, the more comprehensive the campaign is, and the more dangerous it is perceived by the Iranians, the more likely it is that Israel will take action. whether offensively or defensively. So, what does Trump intend? In my opinion, he wants to build up pressure with the deployment. At the same time, he wants to minimize the risk of Iranian counterattacks, because these are seen as not very promising due to the American troop presence. He likely wants to use this for extortion. The Yipsnet. The article I already showed you says about this. The threats to remove Khamenei could also be a tactical move to get the supreme leader to do what he has so far refused to do: to drink from the poisoned chalice, and to agree to the American demand for a deal, which includes 4 demands: stopping the nuclear program and uranium enrichment, transferring the enriched uranium to a third country, stopping the ballistic missile development program, and ending Iran's terrorist activities. This is seen in Iran as a capitulation agreement, and it is very doubtful that the country will agree to it. But at least it's possible that Trump wants to use the pressure to create the impression that he could harm Iran so much that they would give in politically. At this point, a military strike is still possible, but it could just be a symbolic attack like the one against Syria in 2017. As I mentioned in the last video, it was mostly a waste of ammunition back then, but Trump could say he kept his word. When the red line he had drawn was crossed, he attacked and thus maintained his credibility, even though it was effectively a waste of ammunition. So far, we have to say the buildup of capabilities is not impressive at all, except for the fact that the American armed forces are, of course, impressive in themselves. Some spring 2025 forces remain on site, for example. The Patriot battery from South Korea, which was deployed to the Middle East before Operation Midnight Hammer, has been relocated back to South Korea. I currently see no evidence that there are any new anti-aircraft batteries being deployed to the Middle East. So if we want to assess it, there are no signs that the Iranian armed forces have been significantly disloyal. That means even individual strikes won't suddenly change everything. The Iranian regime has demonstrated both the willingness and the ability to use significant force against the revolutionaries. So there would have to be massive support if a regime change were intended. It's unrealistic to think killing Khamenei alone would achieve this. Another faction could still take power afterward, but that won't lead to a fundamental change in foreign or domestic policy. If some faction, for example from the Revolutionary Guards, were to take power after the killing of the supreme leader, then a single strike would not be enough. It would require ongoing support, ongoing American attacks over weeks or months. But Trump probably doesn't want a prolonged war with major and serious consequences for the Middle East, because in such a context, of course, the allies of the Americans would also be drawn in. American bases in different countries would be attacked, and oil shipments from the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz would be targeted. That would have consequences for the world economy, and that's all something Trump most likely doesn't want. And the whole thing would still largely be without any guarantee of success, because as long as the armed forces remain loyal to the regime, and the revolutionaries themselves don't have enough weapons to defeat the armed forces, there is simply no prospect of success, even with airstrikes. So at this point, nothing is really clear. I think it's possible that an airstrike could happen, but probably more as a punishment for crossing a red line, not as a move toward regime change. Ultimately, we'll have to see how much of this happens. To stay updated, please subscribe and click the bell for future videos. If you liked the video, please give a thumbs up and comment if you have something to add. That's all for now. Thank you for your attention, and see you soon. Thanks also to Patreon supporters and YouTube members. Thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Komp and Lieutenants Jans von Eck, Uwe Dufresne, Tubib, Karsten Schultz, Gulasch Nasher, 4000 Tequila, 42 Badass Lawyer, Matt Brick, Robert Veal, Vision Sound Lab, Mutter, Maury, Burtonmant, Yanis, Gu Anti-X, and Sasha Müller-Cunningham. You all rock. Thank you. None of this would be possible without you.